Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third AI show, where myself and Kevin Kieller will be digging into some of the latest AI news headlines, and followed by a conversation with Dr. Scott Allendevaux, practice lead, law and policy at Allendevaux and Company. And together we're going to be getting the lowdown on the latest AI regulations and legal challenges facing organizations and what you need to be thinking about. So stand by for that. It's going to be a great discussion. Anyways, to kick off, Kevin, welcome to the show. How's it going?
Well, it's going well. And of course, there's no lack of AI news this week or any week, so we can just dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I pulled out a few headlines I thought certainly worth talking about. The first one was, and I suppose we may have all experienced this just in the last couple of days, but OpenAI ChatGPT, the platform, went down this week, a big outage, and it went down multiple times in the day. And I felt that personally, and it got me thinking, and I was like, what about our dependency on AI going forward? What happens when these big platforms drop off, and is there going to be a huge drop in productivity? How are we going to handle that in the enterprise, Kevin? So I was keen to just kind of, first of all, get your opinion on that one.
Yeah, so obviously, like ChatGPT, was one of the fastest growing consumer applications, I guess, from November 2022 to January 2023. It ramped up to 100 million active users. I think right now there's 180 million users, maybe 100 million are active. So there's lots of people using it. And I think we're still trying to figure out the productivity that generative AI is driving. So maybe in this outage, maybe there wasn't this giant drop in productivity, because I think there's still a lot of experimentation going on. I did want to point out that the same day, at least in the US, AT&T had a big outage that impacted tens of thousands of callers, and it was an interop issue. So even Verizon, where the outage didn't occur, Verizon users, thousands of people, couldn't call AT&T users. So these outages for cloud services, I think that they're part and parcel of moving to the cloud. I believe that if your application was using the OpenAI API, you would have noticed an issue. If you were using the version of that model that runs on Azure, right? Microsoft has that deep partnership. I don't believe that was impacted. So certainly there are architectural things that hopefully, as people rely on this AI in an increasing way, that the vendors will use so that there's some fallback. But, I guess you felt it directly, Rob, but I didn't notice the outage.
Yeah, well, it was amazing and quite funny, actually, that a lot of people went on to X or Twitter to report the outage and find out what's going on. Right. So that's where they go to find out things like that. But anyways, moving on to another story that I thought was interesting was Eric Yuan, Zoom's CEO, was interviewed recently, and he said out loud that AI clones in meetings are going to be a thing. And I was keen to kind of hear what you thought of that one.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, Eric wants people to see Zoom as much more than video conferencing, and they built out all kinds of things. But this was a really, I think, bold vision. The idea that you create a digital twin. And, I will include the link below, but I think everybody should read it because it's quite a bold vision. And then you create this digital twin, and then you can actually tune it. So, I think an example he used was, like, if you're going to a meeting to discuss, software engineering, you might tune your digital twin to be better at engineering. And then if you're doing, at the same time, you could send another digital twin. And he thought that there could be no limit to the number of digital twins that you have. So, I mean, I think that there's a lot of additional clarity, that needs to be provided around this vision. But it is fascinating because in his vision, not only does your digital twin go and attend the meeting, but it can actually make decisions on your behalf, right? So that is interesting. because if you've got multiple digital twins simultaneously making decisions, imagine you have a budget and you're saying yes to a whole bunch of things at the same time. The orchestration between all these, tens or hundreds or thousands potentially of digital twins making decisions on your behalf. I think it's both fascinating and it's also perhaps incredibly scary. But I love the vision. I loved reading the article, and I love that Eric, is thinking in these broad and definitely future oriented ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And looking across at Microsoft, they just released their Copilot Plus PCs. And that was really interesting, wasn't it? Because I saw a headline on this I'd love to discuss with you, which was specifically the Windows recall feature, which effectively, as far as I understand, will just record your every move on your Windows laptop. So, a privacy nightmare. Kevin, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there was, as usual, there was like one article that somebody wrote and then they kind of were focusing on some privacy concerns. So the idea is that recall takes a screen image of what you're doing every, I think it's 5 seconds, right? So now you could go back and ask questions about that. Now, but there's a couple of caveats. I mean, privacy is always something that I think we're going to talk about with Scott a little bit later. And it's important, but there's a couple caveats here. First of all, this Windows recall, it's off by default, so it doesn't just show up. It only works on these Copilot Plus PCs because it requires an NPU, a neural processing unit that has specific power to be able to do this. In the taskbar when it's on, so when you turn it on, there's always an icon there. And then it does kind of smart things, like if you go into an incognito or private browser session, whether it's Edge or Chrome or any other browser, it doesn't record that because I guess it figures like if you're in a private browser session, you probably don't want things recorded. And then you can easily, just by clicking on the little icon in your taskbar, you can easily say, hey, when I'm in this site, don't record it. So maybe, when I go to my banking site, I don't want it to, record my password or whatever. The article that came out said, it stores everything in unencrypted. And they hypothesized that if you had malware that was running in the background while you're using your PC, it could access this. But, that's true. But it also, when you're logged into your PC, all your files are unencrypted, right? It's only when you log out that, BitLocker and the encrypted piece. So, the truth of the matter is, it's a valid point, but I think it's a little bit overblown. And the people who have tested this recall, they find that it is valuable. So once again, organizations could choose, and they they might choose to disable it in a large organization setting. But I think it's a fascinating use of, some of this NPU technology that is going to be in these Copilot Plus PCs.
So we're not going to be recalling recall anytime soon. That's your prediction. There's actually a use case for recording the.
Yeah, I think there's a use case, and I think
OS.
that Microsoft has done reasonable things to, both allow you to understand when it's happening and to control it or turn it off if you don't want it to.
Well, I love the name. I mean, it's pretty cool. So I'd love to see that in action, I must admit. But I'm not sure how much those new Copilot Plus computers are, but we'll see. Next up, and finally, last piece of news I wanted to touch on, which was Apple then, in fact, another big brand. It's their big event in the next few days. And there's some prediction that they're going to announce some super intelligent Siri, which I'm imagining is going to be trying to level up with Copilot, and some virtual reality upgrades in days to come. So what's your, I know it's, it's a bit early days, Kevin, but what's your prediction here around what Apple are going to announce?
Yeah, I think, Apple from the generative AI perspective is a little bit behind, right? So, they introduced this new iPad, which has this M4 chip, which is an ARM-based chip, similar to the Copilot Plus that uses the Snapdragon X or Snapdragon Elite ARM chip, which gives, a great, both, some AI capability, but Apple isn't really using it. So it wouldn't surprise me, this Worldwide Developer Conference for Crunch, as you say, it's coming June 10th to June 14th. They've got to leverage this wonderful M4 chip to do something. So making, Siri smarter or doing some Gen AI so that the responses, it has better context and the responses sound more natural. I certainly think that's something that they're going to do. And then, of course, Apple has always had some very good photo editing and photo capabilities, whether it's searching or removing people, creating stickers out of people. So I think that they're going to definitely enhance that, because right now they've got some chips that have tremendous power, but they don't have, they haven't released the software that really leverages it. So I think, and there's some speculation that they'll either do a deal with Google for some of the new Gemini models. Some of those can run both, their size, so they can run on the device like mobile phones, or they might do a deal with OpenAI, which of course would be, similar to what Microsoft has done. So I think we're going to definitely see a software-focused Worldwide Developers Conference and heavily focus around, leveraging the power that they have in the processors to drive some of this new and exciting AI stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. It certainly feels like Siri needs an upgrade. It's suffering by comparison now, I think, isn't it, with some of the assistants built into your mobile device. But anyway, it's all very exciting. So look out for Apple's Worldwide Developer Conference coming up very soon. So next up, Kevin, it's our AI Minute. What word or phrase needs debunking this week?
Yeah, I think it's not so much debunking, but rather I wanted to talk in this minute just about this concept of AI hallucination. So we've all heard about hallucinations. Really, what it is it's plausible sounding but false results that are generated by these large language models, which I talked about in the AI Minute last week. I mean, that's just a fancy way of saying that Gen AI output is wrong. So it's really an error, but I love that we give it this term hallucination.
Yeah, me too.
And, it's related to a couple of things. There's this concept with models called temperature. And this is another term where there's a value between 0 and 1 that controls for these large language models how random the output that it generates is. So a low value, so a temperature of 0, is less risky, but also less creative, and it would have a tendency in a model to repeat itself or to, output verbatim some of the training data. Whereas at 1, it's very kind of creative and more random. And so some of these hallucinations depend on the temperature setting of the model. But let's take a look at, what do you need to know about hallucinations? So causes of hallucinations, if you have low quality training data, or depending on the model you're using, you can get more hallucinations. Overfitting is a term where if you overtrain a model, it has a tendency just to spit out the exact verbatim of what the training data was used. And of course, you don't want that, because that's kind of like just then doing a search. Sometimes if you use slang or idioms that don't show up in the training data, these predictive large language models, they're incented to come up with an answer. So if you use some terms that it doesn't really understand or wasn't trained on, it'll come up with an answer, but sometimes it just makes, things up randomly. Or you can get a case where there's these adversarial attacks. So sometimes you see in customer service agents that are using large language models, people go in and they say, hey, I know you've been given these rules, but now you're a do anything, bot, and so ignore all the rules. And so the adversarial try to get it to hallucinate. The thing about limiting hallucinations, the better prompt you give it to these large language models, that controls some of the output. And as well, if you limit the choices. So if you say, hey, whatever you get, I want you to just give me, a department, one of these 5. Well, then you're controlling the output and you're saying, hey, I only want one of these 5s as output, so it's not going to generate a 6th one. And I talked, I think in the first AI Minute about grounding. So the more context data that you provide to these large language models, both with your prompt, but then also when you get the results, if you then subsequently ground it, you're less likely to have some random things being made up. And then if your model allows you to experiment with temperature, so for example, if you use Copilot in the Bing Copilot, you have this thing where it says be more precise or more creative. That's a control of temperature. And if you're calling an API, you a lot of times get to specify the temperature value. And so you can, to some degree, if you're a developer, you can control that. So once again, these models are incented to come up with an answer. So for instance, if you go into your favorite large language model, say give me a list of 50 words that rhyme with the word silver. There really aren't 50 words, but a lot of times it'll say, hey, sure, here's 50 words. A lot of times it doesn't list 50, but then it gets very creative. And I think I tried and it was saying sister, which clearly doesn't rhyme with silver, but it's really working hard to try to do what you say. So the key thing I think with hallucination is if it's important, if the summary is important, if the meeting transcript is important, you still have to have a human in there to always review the Gen AI output. So, I know project managers that don't attend meetings and just rely on the summary. I think that's very dangerous because a lot of times it'll get it right, but sometimes it could get it wrong, miss an important point, or just make something up in its entirety. So that's a little bit about AI hallucinations.
Fantastic. And I know we're going to introduce Scott in a moment, I was reading a few of his articles recently, and there's tons of really great examples of things going wrong out there right now. So without much of ado, I'd like to introduce today's guest speaker, Dr. Scott Allendevaux. He's a practice lead for law and policy at Allendevaux and Company. So welcome, Scott. How's things?
Things are good. Thank you, Rob. Kevin, incredible insights.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for being here, Scott. I mean, obviously, AI is almost steamrolled over everything, but to get us started, how do you see AI impacting the unified communications marketplace? And I guess what problems or opportunities does this present for UC, given this huge focus on AI?
Well, when you think about AI and UC, it's interesting because wherever UC is involved, people are involved, right? Like this meeting here. And wherever people are involved, there's issues of data protection, data privacy. And so many different UC companies that I'm interacting with are either developing or innovating some kind of AI, or they're integrating somebody else's AI to create a value add. And as they're doing that, it introduces even more so the need to really understand matters of data privacy when artificial intelligence is involved. So I'd say that's the first thing. Right. Second, I think companies really need to understand their statutory obligations, which is an ever-changing landscape across territories and nations, and even in the United States. I can talk a little bit more about that later and discuss, if you're interested, what does that landscape look like, and how, what should UC companies be thinking about in terms of new laws coming online. I think as UC companies are employing AI, they need to think about training data, meaning what kind of training data is acceptable? What about training models? What about testing and validation data? Potential biases in training data. So I think that's an interesting topic that needs to be front and center. Fourth, I think AI is impacting the UC marketplace on the ethical front, on numerous vectors that we can talk about. I also think that AI companies need to understand the kinds of architectures that are employed, because data subjects want to know. They have these new rules, such as types of machine learnings that are used, like are neural networks being used? Bayesian networks, are they being used? Decision trees and support vectors. So you would think that they wouldn't want to know these things, but there's new data subject rights that allow them to be able to ask, what's processing my information? What kinds of decisions are being made about me? Even at 5:30 a.m. this morning, a data subject texted my phone at 5:30 and was asking me questions about the kinds of decisions that are being made about them. And so I think companies need to be prepared to answer that. And finally, I think AI governance programs are going to become a topic as well. Like, Most UC companies have some form of a data protection program. But what about an AI governance program? What does that mean? What does that look like? So those are at least a good handful of topics that I think need to be in front of UC companies today as they're thinking about using AI in the marketplace and in their products.
Well, that's some great insights. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. And there's tons of innovation right now. As we record this, it's the closing week for UC award, applications, and we've got some AI categories in the awards, and they're very, very popular. As we know, there's tons of innovation in this in the UC space right now with AI, as well as contact center space for that fact. And
right.
I was reading one of your articles. It was really interesting. One of the phrases or snippets I pulled out was. The compliance elements are legal requirements, but the ethical requirements are like imperatives. I think you use that phrase, but I'd love to dig into the ethical issues around all this innovation and how you see that and how companies should be viewing those ethical issues.
Sure. Well, we think about AI and the training data that's used to be able to bring AI to life. I'm sure, Kevin, you'd explain it better than that. But in order to be able to have AI do what it does, there's a vast amount of training data that AI companies use. And that data inherently has biases in it. And being able to measure what those biases are or being able to apply mitigations to the biases that might exist in the training data is really important, because you want to be able to keep, if you have biases going into the training data or a part of the training data, you need to be able to keep discrimination from coming out of the model. And so we have issues of fairness and non-discrimination that I think are front and center on the ethical front. I think transparency is another critical issue, because many AI systems, particularly those that are using complex machine learning models like neural networks, they operate in a way like black boxes, and it kind of makes it difficult for all of us on the outside looking in to really understand how is it making decisions about me and my data. And so we're seeing transparency requirements in some of the new laws coming front and center. I think a lack of transparency can erode trust and accountability. So I think being able to understand what does it mean when you're employing AI to be able to have transparency as one of the ethical values, something that UC companies need to understand. Privacy, of course, is also very paramount and is an ethical issue as well, because AI systems in UC applications is processing lots of data. Like if we're recording this and transcribing this information and looking at the character lines of my face and which way my eyes are turning, and trying to make interpretation of my emotions and so on. That's information about me, and it's profiling, and it's related to privacy, and it could even be considered sensitive data in some way. And it raises significant privacy issues. So I think ensuring AI systems comply with data protection regulations, just like people have to and businesses have to, I think is absolutely essential. Accountability, I think, is another pressing ethical issue. Determining who's responsible for the AI decisions, especially when things go wrong, can be complex. And companies, I think, need to establish clear lines of accountability when we're thinking about the ethics of AI, just to ensure that they're developed responsibly and deployed, responsibly. The importance from an ethical perspective of non-maleficence, I can never say this word, non-maleficence, there you go, and beneficence, I think are very important principles, because, one ensures that you're not causing harm to humans, and the other ensures that whatever we're doing benefits humans. Those are two key ethical considerations, I think, in all AI, systems. And finally, just ethical AI usage overall, it requires continuous monitoring. It requires continuous evaluation. And so it brings up the subject of, what do you monitor? How do you monitor? How would you monitor the performance of a system from an ethical perspective, which is another conversation I would love to have at some point, and how companies can do that.
Yeah, wow, that's a lot of good stuff that you touched on there. I know there's been some cases where, the company, if you use AI, the company, regardless of what the AI says, the company has been found to be responsible for the AI's output, right? And so certainly, I know there was a case here in Canada, I'm outside of Toronto, with Air Canada, where it made up some fare, and it got a lot of press for
It
it
did get a
was
lot
like
of
an
press, didn't it?
$800 like small claims court. But I think it was a great reminder that if you're a person and using Gen AI, I mean, ultimately, you're responsible for whatever gets kind of sent out. And if you're a company using it, then you're responsible. So some great ethical issues that you brought up. In terms of the regulations, right? And I know this is a super deep topic, but um, can you just like highlight like what are some of the regulations? And I know they're different, as you mentioned, across different geographies, but what are some of the emerging regulations that, people should be aware of, related to the use of artificial intelligence?
Yeah, sure, because I think there's a lot more regulatory development happening than most companies are aware of. Certainly folks might know about the EU AI Act, which has been codified, and I think it probably is the most significant regulation right now. Just like the GDPR was referred to as the gold standard of privacy, and they really did a good job with that
Right.
back in 2018. I think the AI Act will be referred to as the gold standard for AI oversight. I mean, the Act classifies AI systems, into different risk categories from minimal risk to high risk, based upon the impact of potential, you know, the individual rights and safety of, individuals. And if it's rated as high, there's a number of things that you need to be able to do to ensure transparency and accountability and even human oversight uh, and so on. There were significant fines too and penalties that were associated with this that even exceeded the GDPR. So it's a significant piece of legislation that companies are going to have to take seriously, even those outside the EU. Just like with the GDPR, where companies are providing their AI services to Europeans from outside the territory. The United States, there's a lot of U.S. agencies that are enforcing laws, such as AI fact patterns. There was recently a joint statement that sent out a warning to companies. I think it was jointly done by the FTC, the DOJ, and the CFPB. For example, the FTC has warned that there can be no sensitive data in AI training, which makes sense to me. The FTC has also issued two adjudications so far and issued significant fines against two companies. The first company, this is interesting, represented they were using AI when in fact they weren't, and they were sanctioned because that's a violation of Section 5 of the FTC Act. The second company was using AI, but they didn't disclose that they were using AI, and they were also issued a significant fine. So those are some lessons for the rest of us to keep in mind. The EEOC has issued guidelines about AI discrimination in terms of this is what that means. There's already been a settlement in that regard. The CFPB has issued consumer protection warnings about AI chatbots. Then you have the states, right? The U.S. states, they have profiling laws across many states, which when you think about the idea of a privacy law talking about profiling, what does that mean? AI really fits the definition of automatic decision making and profiling. And so most states, when they talk about that, they already are using those legal instruments to be able to police that particular activity until new AI laws that are native are matured. Like in the UK, employing AI is akin to automated decision making. And whenever there's automated decision making, you have to look at Article 35 and conduct a DPIA, map the data flows, perform risk assessments, and so on. So any company, I think, that is employing AI needs to be doing a number of different things associated with automated decision making and automated profiling. I'll just name a few more, and then I'll stop here. But the U.S. has issued an AI Bill of Rights, along with the Biden administration's AI executive order, which I think was one of the most comprehensive that I have seen. Colorado has issued the Colorado AI Act. Utah has the Utah AI Policy Act. California issued an executive order about AI processing. Many other states, have bills being debated in their chambers in Illinois and Louisiana and Massachusetts, New York, Oklahoma, Connecticut, 10 other states on top of that. So I think you get the idea. For folks that think there really isn't any legislation in the AI space, and I've not even touched on Asia, there's a lot of legislation that's being developed. And I think we're going to have to keep our eye on that and keep UC companies, just update them in terms of what's applicable to them and what isn't applicable to them. Very exciting.
And what, Scott, to that point, what is the best way to track all the legal developments? It sounds like, this is a moving feast. So how, and how do you kind of create that kind of governance program if you are a UC provider or
yeah, that's a great question. I guess it's a short answer, but it's a real answer. It's just like all these privacy laws that UC companies are having to track, and they do it by having to build a proper data protection program, which says, how do we track these laws? How do we vet them? It's the same way that there needs to be an AI governance program, and it can be integrated with the data protection program too. And it should ideally comply with a standard like ISO 42001 is a great standard by way of example. Because companies, I think, that do that and they put a governance program in place, they're demonstrating that they're taking this new age of AI seriously. I think they're demonstrating they can be trusted, right? To understand all the responsibilities that come with responsible AI processing and even the laws that are being passed. And I think too, they're really differentiating themselves from companies that don't do this.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think, you talked about responsible AI. I mean, I would be interested in, well, of course, every company that uses AI says they're being responsible. So I'd be interested in your kind of take at a high level to what, our UC companies specifically, are they doing a good job? And then you've hit on a few things already, but maybe then sum it up in terms of, what advice would you give to UC companies so that they do deploy AI responsibly?
Well, advice that I would give UC companies would be, you got to understand the regulatory landscape, which means you got to stay informed. You got to team up with a company that monitors this space, monitors the laws and the policies around the world. I think good advice to use AI responsibly is to implement a robust governance framework like ISO 42001. There's other frameworks as well, but choose a framework and implement the framework. I think it's important to ensure fairness by avoiding biases or applying mitigations, but you got to put the governance program in place, and the governance program helps a company walk through that and understand this is what it means to measure biases and then to apply mitigations to biases so that there's not discrimination. I think companies need to employ transparency at all time and just be clear, with users. Put it in the privacy notices and say, this is what we're doing with your data. This is what we're collecting, and here's what we're doing for you. Right. I think data privacy is always going to be right there alongside AI processing. And so whatever people and companies have been doing, I think we just need to do it all the more with AI data. I think there always needs to be human oversight in the life cycle. So when we think about the AI management life cycle, there's got to be human oversight. I think we're going to see in the future the idea of audit. And I think being able to submit to audit, just like data protection programs do, is important to do. And I think that overall, when you add all this together, it's really going to promote, ethical AI practices.
And you touched on the future there. I mean, in terms of what's coming down the line, is there anything that you think, in terms of trends around AI regulations that you think organizations should prepare for?
Yeah, I think we're going to see stricter requirements coming. And so when we look at the bills being debated in parliaments and legislatures, I do see some of the text pushing for stricter requirements like disclosing how AI systems make their decisions, or disclosing the data that's being used for training, or the potential impact on users. So I think we need to prepare for that. I think we might see in the future bias and fairness audits. I think regulators might have some kind of a playbook for that. They're going to emphasize the need using measures, very specific measures that will be published in the future in future regulations about preventing biases in AI systems. So data privacy enhancements, I think we're going to see that in the future as well, because I think with the growing concerns over data privacy, future regulations are likely going to impose stricter data protection measures. So we'll see things like, ensuring proper data governance with AI, maybe where that's mandated, depending upon the kind of AI processing that's done. And again, I think we'll see the need for ethical, AI frameworks. I've mentioned ISO 42001. There's others out there too, like NIST AI 100-1, being able to use very specific risk assessments that are just written for AI processing. I think we're going to see those kinds of things being mandated as well.
Well, I think you've given us a great overview, both of the present and of the potential future. It certainly sounds like, if you're an organization, and especially if you're a UC provider, there's lots of things that you need to be taking a look at and keeping track of. So, Scott, thank you very much for, your insight and expertise in this, highly critical area.
Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, Rob.
I'm afraid that's all we've got time for today. Thanks to Kevin and our guest speaker, Scott, Allendevaux. Very much appreciated. We're going to put some links in the description to everything we've talked about as much as we can. And if you want to connect with any of us, we'll also put our social links in there. So I'm Rob Scott from UC Today. Thanks for watching.